What lies behind silence? Juliet finds the path to her true self. Juliet woke up early in the morning. The light, barely breaking through the curtains, softly illuminated her bedroom. The air was filled with the freshness of a new day. The quiet sound of the wind outside the window was the only thing disturbing the morning silence. She took a deep breath and felt her body fill with energy, and her thoughts became clear. Today was a special day. She glanced around the room. Everything was in its place, cozy and familiar. But today, she had decided to go for a walk, not just to the park, but to somewhere she hadn't been in a long time, to the forest behind her house. Dressed in comfortable shoes and a light jacket, she headed for the door. Each step was calm and measured, as if nature itself was waiting for her arrival. It was cool outside, but not cold, and the air was filled with the refreshing scent of dew, fresh grass, and flowers. Juliet felt how with every step, the world around her became clearer and more peaceful. She walked along the path leading to the forest and felt her thoughts calming, her body relaxing. The birds' songs in the branches, the soft rustle of leaves underfoot, and even the gentle steps on the ground. Everything merged into a soothing melody in which Juliet found peace. With each step, her breathing became steady and her thoughts clearer. She was not in a hurry. Time didn't matter. What was important now was simply being here in the moment. The sun was just beginning to rise, and its rays gently touched the trees, casting whimsical shadows on the ground. The wind played with the leaves, rustling and whispering, as if the forest itself was greeting her. Passing by the old oaks, she stopped to admire their grandeur. These trees had been here for so many years, and every root, every branch seemed to have absorbed everything that had happened around them. In their shade, Juliet felt tranquility and strength. She sat on a stump, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to momentarily sink into the silence. "Everything will be fine," she whispered to herself, as if it were a reminder that her path, like the path of these trees, would last as long as it needed, without haste, accepting each day as it came. Time didn't matter in this forest, nor did it in her life. Juliet had already understood that there was no need to search for quick solutions or strive for something specific. Sometimes it was important just to be here and now, to enjoy every moment. She left all worries behind and focused on the sensations that nature provided her. After a while, she stood up and continued her journey. Light steps carried her further into the forest, to the place that had always been sacred to her. Every turn, every glance was filled with calmness, and the forest seemed to come alive with each step she took, offering its wisdom and understanding. When Juliet reached a small stream, she stopped and sat on a stone to rest. The water flowed quietly, creating a soothing sound that penetrated the deepest corners of her soul. At that moment, she realized how much time she had spent trying to find answers in a world full of noise and hustle. But the real answers didn't need to be sought. They were in her heart, just like this water, pure and calm. Juliet closed her eyes and listened. Here, among nature, she felt completely safe and at peace. Every breath filled her soul with new light, and every exhale carried away the remnants of worries and tension. After a few minutes, she got up again. The walk in the forest had filled her with inner silence, and now Juliet was ready to return home. But she knew that this silence would stay with her wherever she went, and that was the most important thing. Juliet walked back along the forest path, feeling each step as a kind of meditation. The leaves softly rustling beneath her feet seemed endless and alive, as though every moment reminded her that everything in nature is connected, that everything flows, changes, but at the same time remains eternal. She thought about how often, in life, she had hurried, not noticing such simple wonders as these soft leaves, or the first ray of sunshine breaking through the branches. Juliet's steps grew lighter, and her breathing steadier and calmer. In this forest, she felt at home, as if every root, every branch was familiar to her, like an old friend. Here, among nature, there was no time, no space, no need to hurry anywhere. It was a place where one could simply be, simply exist, without striving for results or goals. She stopped at a small clearing where a lone stone stood. Juliet sat on it and closed her eyes, allowing her mind to quiet. At that moment, she felt her thoughts, like gusts of wind, drifting away, and only the moment of peace remained. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, she quietly repeated to herself, trying to focus on her breath, as a friend who practiced yoga once taught her. It wasn't just an exercise. It was a return to herself, to her soul, to her present self. The world around Juliet was serene. Everything she needed was here. She thought about how, when she was young, she always searched for something, striving to go somewhere. She always thought she wasn't good enough, that she needed more. More success, more love, more recognition. But over the years, she had learned to let go of these desires. They began to fade, leaving only space for the present, for what was here right now. And there was something amazing in that. Juliet smiled, opened her eyes, and looked at the world around her. The sun had risen high, its rays breaking through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground. It was beautiful, but even more beautiful was the feeling that her heart was filled with light and peace. She no longer sought external signs of success. She already felt successful. All she needed was to be here and now. She stood up from the stone and decided to continue her walk. The forest was growing denser, and the air was cool, filled with the freshness and scent of pine. Juliet's steps became more harmonious with the surrounding world. She walked slowly, savoring each moment and listening to the sounds of the forest. Time seemed to stretch, and she no longer worried about what she should be doing. A few squirrels passed her by, nimbly jumping from branch to branch, playing and enjoying life. Juliet smiled. She always found comfort in watching animals, especially those small, active creatures. Their lives were simple. They followed their instincts, played, and, when necessary, searched for food. There was no fear of the future, no thoughts about what would come next. Everything was in harmony with nature. Stopping by a small stream, Juliet sat on a rock and watched the water flow, endlessly, with a soft murmur, bypassing rocks and obstacles. Everything in life, like this river, passes, changes, but retains its nature. She thought that perhaps this was one of life's most important truths. Everything flows, But the key is not to try to change the flow, but to learn to move with it. Everything has its time, Juliet quietly said. You just have to learn to live with it. She smiled again, feeling peace within. With each step, each inhale and exhale, she felt her heart fill with lightness. Juliet no longer tried to solve all problems at once. She no longer rushed ahead. She understood that each moment of life wasn't just a step towards something greater, but was valuable in itself. After spending a long time by the stream, Juliet stood up and headed home, confident she had found the inner peace she had been searching for. She wasn't in a hurry. Her steps felt like part of a grand and beautiful process, the process of life. When Juliet returned home, the light had already started to fade, and the evening air had filled with a special coolness. She quietly closed the door behind her, leaving everything associated with work and worries outside. Now was the time for calm, for inner silence. Everything she had experienced in the forest seemed to remain in her heart and thoughts. It was the silence she had been searching for, and now she felt it wrap around her like a warm blanket. Inside the house, it was cozy, and Juliet didn't hurry. She didn't open any work emails or check her phone, as usual. This evening, she didn't need anyone or anything. She made herself a cup of tea and sat in the chair by the window. Her gaze unconsciously turned to the sunset, which was especially beautiful that evening, with warm shades of orange and pink flowing into deep purple. She often liked watching sunsets because they seemed to remind her that everything in life comes and goes, but there is always something beautiful in every moment. The tea filled her cup with its gentle aroma, and Juliet felt her breath become deep and steady once again. She smiled. Here, in this house, she felt safe, in the silence that had now become part of her. In this space, there was no need to seek external sources of fulfillment. Everything she needed was already inside her. She remembered how her life used to be filled with anxiety. Workdays, meetings, conversations, constant bustle, and striving for results. All of this drained her energy and often left her feeling like she wasn't living in the present moment. Back then, she thought she had to be successful, that her worth was measured by her achievements. But now, in this solitude, in the silence and peace, Juliet understood. Success wasn't always about achieving something, but about simply being in her life, being in its natural flow. Juliet placed the cup of tea on the table and closed her eyes, listening to her thoughts. These reflections didn't come right away, and she felt how long it had taken her to reach this moment. In the forest, on her walk, she had felt free from worries and anxieties for the first time in a long while. But now, sitting in the chair, she realized that she had not only physical freedom but inner freedom. Freedom from old beliefs that she had to be someone or achieve something. In this silence, she was herself, and that was enough. Suddenly, she remembered a conversation with a friend that had taken place many years ago. Back then, Juliet had shared how hard it felt to be in a world full of expectations and demands. Her friend, always confident in herself and her life, had told her, "Life is not measured by the number of steps you take. It is measured by how you feel in the moment, how you perceive what is." These words had long since faded in her memory, but only now did Juliet truly feel their meaning. "I finally understand," she whispered quietly to herself. Everything I was looking for was always right here. In that moment, she felt a special connection with herself, as if her soul had found the center it had once lost in the pursuit of external goals. How many years had she spent trying to find her way, without realizing that, in truth, the path had always been inside her? And it wasn't difficult or hard. It was like a river, flowing and smooth, needing no effort or resistance. Just being and flowing with that current, that's what she understood. Remaining in the silence of her home, Juliet closed her eyes and once again immersed herself in her thoughts. She realized that every moment, every day, every step had its value. Everything in her life was part of her journey, and even those moments that seemed lost or empty had brought her here. To this understanding, to this inner peace, Juliet felt lightness growing within her. She no longer tried to achieve something. She accepted that there was no end to this path, and what mattered was not its conclusion, but every moment she experienced. The sunset outside the window filled the room with soft light, and she felt the inner light awaken in her soul. This light was eternal, just like nature itself, just like her own existence. With each breath in and out, Juliet felt her gratitude grow for being, for the world around her, and for the journey she had traveled. Everything will be fine, she told herself again, quietly and confidently. The next morning, when the sun woke up again, shining through the blinds in her bedroom, Juliet woke up feeling light. The calmness she had felt for several days had become a part of her, and she realized that this feeling was not just temporary. It was her new state, an inner peace that no longer depended on external factors. Today, her day was not filled with plans or tasks. She was not in a hurry anywhere, nor was she rushing to make decisions. Again, it was that moment when there was no need to earn happiness or peace. They were already here. On days like this, Juliet allowed herself to truly enjoy what she had. After a light breakfast, she went for a walk. Her house had a garden, which she had recently planted, trying to understand how plants truly like to grow. She watched as each bush, flower, and leaf followed its natural cycle, not trying to break this order. And she, too, felt her life had become a part of this cycle. Her steps were slow, and every thought that came to her mind was light and unhurried. She stopped by a rose bush and stroked its delicate petals. She inhaled its fragrance, fresh and clean, like her new perspective on life. I wish everything could be this simple, thought Juliet. But the journey has been long, and every trial in my life brought me here. And for that, I am grateful. When she returned to the house, she felt like resting a little. She went to her room, sat in the chair by the window, and closed her eyes. Suddenly, memories came to her mind, of her childhood, of growing up in a small town, of her first feelings and thoughts. She remembered school, friends, her first dreams. All of this seemed so distant, as if it had happened to someone else, not to her. But at the same time, those memories were vivid and bright, like scenes from a movie she had filmed in her mind. Juliet didn't know why these memories had surfaced now, but she didn't try to ignore them. They seemed like a part of her path, a kind of mirror in which she could see how far she had come. Time passed and she changed, but those moments from the past, joys and sorrows, successes and failures, were all a part of her, and they had shaped her personality. She remembered how she once dreamed of a different life, one that seemed brighter and fuller. Back then, her soul was full of doubts, and she sought answers to questions about her place in the world. But now, looking back, Juliet realized that there had not been a single step that hadn't led her to this moment. Every moment had mattered, every experience was significant. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to immerse in these memories without trying to judge or evaluate them. She simply accepted them as an inseparable part of herself. There was no regret, no bitterness, only peace, tranquility, and the understanding that every experience was a lesson. When Juliet opened her eyes, she felt warmth fill her body and soul. Remembering her youth, she realized how much of her life had been filled with fear. Fear of not being good enough, fear of not overcoming difficulties, fear of the future. But now she understood that this fear was just smoke that dissipates if you don't feed it. "I can be myself," she whispered, as if reassuring herself. "I am good enough, and there is strength in that." The weather outside gradually changed, and Juliet felt her thoughts becoming clearer. She understood that there was no longer a need to struggle with herself, and this feeling of freedom was priceless. She had finally accepted herself as she was, with her stories, her weaknesses, and strengths. Opening the windows and letting fresh air into the room, Juliet felt lightness in her chest. She knew that new events and challenges awaited her, but now, with this deep inner understanding, she knew she could handle anything. And most importantly, she knew that the path she had walked was her own, and in this lay her strength. She stood up and went to her garden to once again enjoy its silence and beauty. In this moment, Juliet didn't need anything but the presence of here and now. Several days passed, and Juliet felt her life filling with light as never before. Each new day brought her joy from simple things: the scent of fresh morning air, the warm tea, the connection with nature. She savored these moments of peace, but deep in her soul, there was something else, something that didn't let her rest. She often sat by the window and thought about what she wanted to do next, what would come next in her life. She realized that despite all the inner harmony she had found, changes awaited her. And these changes wouldn't always be as soft and predictable as she had grown used to. Sometimes, change could be difficult, even if it led to something better. One morning, when the sun had just begun to rise above the horizon, Juliet decided to go to the forest again. With each visit, she felt lighter, and she sensed how her connection with nature was becoming deeper. In this quiet place, she could truly dissolve into herself and hear her own thoughts without the influence of the outside world. Her steps were slow, and her breathing steady. The leaves under her feet rustled softly, as if supporting her, inviting her into this state of silence. This time, Juliet felt the air in the forest was especially fresh, and the sounds of nature filled her soul with a unique sense of tranquility. She stopped by a small stream, which murmured quietly as it always did, but today it seemed to sound different. Everything was so familiar and yet new. Sitting on a stone by the water, Juliet looked at her reflection in the stream. She saw her life before her, her experiences, her emotions, her feelings. She realized that this image in the water was not just her reflection, but a reflection of what she had created herself. The water was like a mirror, and in this mirror, she saw her essence. Not the one she once tried to show the world, but the one deep inside her. The past days and weeks had not only brought her peace, but also the realization that the time for change had come. She was no longer the woman she once was. Her inner world had changed, and now she needed to decide how she would move forward. The feeling of change was inevitable, and although she didn't know exactly what lay ahead, Juliet understood. She was ready. The feeling of change surrounded her like a fresh breeze, and she didn't try to resist it. On the contrary, she inhaled this air, allowing herself to fully unfold before it. Change was not always painful, not always scary. Sometimes it brought a sense of freedom, an opportunity to open new horizons, to go places she had never dared before. "I am ready," she whispered quietly, as if saying it not just to herself, but to the whole world. At that moment, when she spoke those words, Juliet felt her heart fill with calm confidence. She was no longer tied to old beliefs and habits. She had accepted her uniqueness, accepted her story. And now, with this new understanding, she was ready to move in the direction that felt the most authentic. She stood up again and continued her walk through the forest, feeling the earth beneath her feet, more familiar now, as if she had always been here. The leaves on the trees rustled as if greeting her, and the birds on the branches sang their light songs. All these sounds now served as a reminder to her. She was not alone on this path. In this world, full of change and unpredictability, she was part of something bigger. And it was in this that her true peace lay. No matter how the world around her changed, Juliet understood that everything she needed was already in her heart. Change didn't mean she would lose herself. On the contrary, it only strengthened her, giving her the chance to unfold. As she made her way home, she felt the light breeze continue to wrap around her, reminding her that change was a natural part of life, and that she must be ready to embrace it with gratitude and an open heart. Inspired by this thought, Juliet entered her home, which now seemed even cozier and warmer, like a place where she could truly be herself. Juliet stood by the window of her kitchen, watching as the cherry tree in the yard slowly lost its last leaves, which gently fell to the ground. Time moved relentlessly forward, and with it, not only nature, but also her own state of being. She no longer felt an urgent need for action, was in no hurry to go anywhere. Time had become something meaningful and valuable to her, rather than just a limited resource to be used most efficiently. With each new day, Juliet felt more and more how the space of her life was filling with quiet, yet firm confidence. The outer world, which once seemed so turbulent and chaotic, was now just a backdrop for her inner world, where order and peace reigned. She sat at the table and opened the notebook that had become an important companion since she began her morning rituals. On its pages, she wrote down her thoughts, feelings, and little observations that seemed to fill her day with meaning. She even started drawing small pictures in the corner of each page, simple lines and shapes, but ones that reflected her inner sensations. In one of these quiet moments, sitting in her cozy kitchen, Juliet thought about how far she had come. She realized that her life was more than just the years she had lived. She couldn't just follow old, familiar paths anymore. She couldn't stay in the same role she had played for others. Change was already here. It had already infiltrated every day of hers. And now she understood that, in order to move forward, she needed to reshape her relationship with the world. Now, in these moments of silence, Juliet felt that everything she had ever wanted could be achieved if she learned to build bridges. But not bridges connecting her with other people, but bridges connecting her inner world with the external world, so that they no longer contradicted each other but interacted harmoniously. She remembered how, in the past, when she faced difficulties or unexpected events, she would lose confidence and try to escape from problems. But now, looking at her life from a new perspective, she understood. The path forward was not always straight and smooth. Sometimes it curved, sometimes it led into a foggy distance. But that was where the beauty lay, in the fact that she could choose how to walk along this path. One of her brightest lessons was that life never stands still. It is always in motion, and although at times she wanted to find the path to perfection, Julieta understood that perfection doesn't exist. Everything is a process, every step has its value, and every moment matters. Time, like a river, flowed forward, and Julieta no longer tried to control it or resist its current. She stood up from the table and looked out the window at the long path that led through her garden and into the forest beyond. This path was familiar and comforting. It was her personal path, and despite its winding nature and uncertainty, she decided to walk it. She decided not only to embrace change, but to use it as an opportunity for growth. Suddenly, the thought occurred to her that everything she had experienced, every difficult moment, every mistake, every disappointment, was connected to her present state. And now, with this understanding, she felt the strength to move forward. She didn't immediately realize that this path was already right in front of her. It wasn't where she had been looking for it, but where she was already standing. Every step she took was a step on this path, and with each new step, she felt herself becoming more confident. Julieta took her notebook and resolutely wrote down one sentence that, it seemed, was the meaning of her life at this moment. I am building bridges between who I am and who I want to become. These words were the key to understanding her journey. She wasn't looking for superpowers or instant solutions now. She was building an internal bridge that allowed her to be at peace with who she was, without being limited by it. That day, she went to the city. It wasn't immediately clear, but with each step, each breath, she felt how this path, her path, was becoming clearer. And although much uncertainty lay ahead, Julieta no longer feared it. Weeks had passed since Julieta first decided to build bridges within herself, connecting her experiences, desires, and fears. She often thought about how her life had been filled with new meaning, how each day brought her more satisfaction. She could feel her inner world becoming richer, how with each step, she became more aware of her strength. But there were moments of doubt as well. One morning, as she sat by the window, enjoying a cup of tea, a sense of uncertainty came over her that she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt her mind start spinning again, looking for answers to questions that didn't yet have answers. Why did the thought of not being able to fully let go of the past torment her so much? Why, Sometimes, despite all her efforts, did she still feel incomplete. In those moments, Julieta realized that she was searching for something greater, something that would help her find her true inner light. From time to time, despite her attempts to find peace, she still lacked something, that light which could complete her inner harmony. Each day, she became more aware that she had become important enough to herself to be true to her feelings and aspirations. And although she understood that the process of self-discovery had no clear boundaries, she still felt the need to continue, to seek. She decided it was time to go to a new place. This place was completely unfamiliar to her, but she believed that it was there she would find the light she had been searching for. She carefully prepared for her journey. This trip was not only physical but internal as well, and she felt how each step brought her closer to something greater. The trip to the new city wasn't unexpected for Julieta. There had always been moments in her life when she changed her location, but this time, everything was different. This journey was important because she wasn't just following an external change. She was following an inner call. When she arrived in the city, Julieta immediately felt the energy of it. But it was the energy of the city itself, its life, not something personal. This place was not her home, but it could certainly help her find answers. Julieta stopped at a small cafe, where she often ordered a cup of coffee. Here, amidst the lively conversations and sounds, she felt how the city was living its own life, and in this process, she sensed how her own life began to sync with the rhythm of the world around her. Stepping out into the street, she suddenly felt an invisible pull, something greater than her conscious thoughts, guiding her forward. She walked without knowing where, but feeling that something important was leading her. That inner light was somewhere ahead, in this city, which seemed to hold answers for her. Walking through the streets, she noticed how with each step, her thoughts became clearer and her breathing more peaceful. The air smelled of spring, and the fragrance of flowers filled her. And then, in the very heart of the city, in a small square, she saw a temple that she hadn't noticed before, until she found herself standing right in front of its entrance. The temple wasn't very large, but there was something captivating in its architecture, something that drew her attention. Julieta decided to enter. As soon as she stepped through the temple's threshold, she was enveloped in a deep sense of peace. It was quiet and bright inside, and the air was filled with the scent of candles and ancient stones. She didn't know exactly what she was searching for in this place, but she understood that here, she felt she had found her place. She sat on a bench in the corner of the temple and simply listened to the silence, feeling how her heart began to slow and her thoughts settled. Everything around her was filled with a special kind of light. This place, this moment, this silence, all of it reminded her that sometimes the best path to oneself is just to be in the moment and allow oneself to feel. Hours passed, and Julieta felt her inner light begin to awaken. She understood that it didn't matter where she was. What mattered was what was inside her. That light she had been searching for had always been with her. It didn't depend on external circumstances. It was inside her. When Julieta left the temple, she no longer felt alone. She knew that this search wasn't about finding a place, but about finding herself, understanding that the light inside her had never faded. This was her discovery, and it gave her the strength to move forward, unafraid of change. Several days had passed since Julieta left the temple, and although she felt her inner light had grown brighter, shadows of the past still occasionally overwhelmed her. Despite the confidence she had gained, old memories still reminded her of their presence. It was strange to realize how easily they could pull her back into moments of doubt, fear, and uncertainty with which she had struggled for so long. One evening, sitting by the window, she suddenly thought about her past. How many years ago, when she was young, she decided to leave everything behind and start a new life from scratch. She thought it would be easier, that she would avoid mistakes, but as life showed, it was much more complicated. Sometimes these thoughts about the past came unexpectedly, like fog, filling the space and making everything around her blurry and unclear. Julieta closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't want to dive into those memories again, didn't want to fight with what had long been left behind. But the longer she tried to avoid them, the stronger the feeling became that she couldn't move forward unless she faced and accepted everything that had happened. And so, one morning, sitting in her cozy chair, she decided it was time to face these shadows. She understood that it was necessary not to avoid them, but to understand and forgive. She began to write. At first, it was difficult. Each word seemed held back, as if it were a key she was afraid to turn. But with each sentence, with each expression, she felt a lightness filling her. She wasn't writing for others. She was writing for herself, to understand how those events and moments had become part of her life and how she could let them go. At some point, as she continued to write, her thoughts cleared and her feelings became more defined. She realized that the past had no power over her unless she allowed it to define her present. Those events had happened, but they could not be her defining factor. The shadows of the past could not overshadow her light unless she allowed them to. When Julieta finished, she exhaled with relief. She wrote in her notebook the words that had become her mantra. The past does not define me. I am what I create today. These words became her inner support. She now understood that her strength lay in how she viewed her life, not in what had happened before. She could become who she wanted to be without looking back at the mistakes of the past. But despite this inner progress, she felt the need to keep moving forward. She decided to embark on a journey to step beyond her comfort zone again, to challenge how far she could overcome her old fears. The journey she planned was not just about changing locations. It was a journey within herself. Juliet decided to go to the mountains, to a place she had long dreamed of visiting. It was her first step into a new stage of life, where she wanted to merge her inner strength with the outside world, to learn to be free again. When Juliet arrived in the mountains, she was greeted by the fresh air and the grandeur of nature, which she could never see in her everyday world. She stood at the edge of a cliff, watching the sunbeams break through the clouds, feeling her soul fill with new energy. Here, away from the usual worries and anxieties, Juliet felt her inner light shine brighter. She realized that it was here she could cleanse herself of everything that hindered her and become more whole. Over the next few days, Juliet walked the mountain trails, meditated by the lakes, enjoying the silence and peace that filled her. She watched the world around her, feeling like a part of something bigger. In the mountains, she realized that every step, every moment was her decision, her movement forward to a new life. In the evenings, when the stars began to fill the sky, Juliet sat by the fire, watching the flames, letting her thoughts flow freely. She no longer tried to control or suppress them. She simply allowed herself to be. And there, sitting on a lonely hill among the mountains, she suddenly understood that every moment of her life was precious, every experience, even if painful, had brought her here. And now, in these mountains, she felt her inner light had become an integral part of her journey. That night, Juliet fell asleep feeling that she was no longer alone. She was in harmony with herself and the world around her. The next morning, Juliet woke up feeling unusually calm. Soft sunlight filtered into her tent, and a light breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh earth. It was the perfect morning to reconnect with the world. She got up, stretched, and closed her eyes, enjoying the silence. This silence was not frightening but soothing. Here, in the mountains, she felt for the first time how it was possible to truly be alone with herself, without stress or pressure from the outside world. With each day spent in these places, Juliet felt her soul being cleansed of everything unnecessary, and her heart filled with lightness. She understood that she not only had to accept her life, but also release everything that had held her back. It wasn't an easy process. She thought about old attachments, old habits that had long become her shackles, but which she continued to carry with her, without even realizing it. She couldn't get rid of everything at once, but in this moment, amidst the majestic mountains and deep forests, Juliet realized that it was time to finally let go of those thoughts and fears that kept her stuck in the past. Every fear, every moment of doubt had been part of her, but could no longer define her life. The next morning, Juliet decided to take a long walk along the trails leading to one of the high cliffs. She walked slowly, enjoying every step, absorbing the energy of the surrounding nature. These moments seemed to embrace her, filling her with an inner light that was brighter than any doubt. Arriving at the edge of the cliff, she stopped and looked down at the valley stretching out before her. With every breath, she felt her body and soul become lighter, as if all the burdens she had carried within herself dissolved into the air. She realized she no longer feared letting go of control. Her life had always been in her hands, and she could choose which path to take. She understood that fear could not be her guide, only her limitation. Juliet decided to take a step into the unknown. Her heart was open to the new. She made the decision to stay in these mountains for a while longer to truly discover herself, to learn to let go, and to be in harmony with what is. She realized that letting go didn't mean losing. Letting go meant giving herself space for growth, for a new beginning. In the following days, she continued her journey through the mountains, sometimes walking alone, sometimes meeting locals who told her about their lives in these places. Each day brought new lessons, new discoveries. Juliet understood that life did not require her to be perfect. It required her to be honest with herself, to be open to change, and to grow. One evening, while sitting by the fire, she reflected on how important this moment was. The moment when she had fully decided to let go. It wasn't just a decision. It was the realization that her life now belonged only to her, and she was ready to move forward, overcoming any obstacles. These mountains had become a symbol of strength and resilience for her, but also a reminder that all difficulties can be overcome if we accept and release them. That evening, for the first time, she felt that not only her body but also her spirit had become free. All the shackles that had held her in the past now lay far behind, and she could finally move forward without looking back. Several weeks passed since Juliet made the decision to change her life. The mountains, her home at that moment, became for her not just a place of peace, but also a symbol of transformation. Every day, every moment there helped her understand more that she wasn't just searching for a new path. She was already on it. And although she didn't have a clear idea of what awaited her in the future, the confidence that her soul was in the right place grew stronger with every step. One morning, as the first rays of the sun painted the sky in warm shades of pink, Juliet left her tent and headed toward the top of the nearest hill. She knew this was her moment. It was more than just a walk. It was her way of leaving behind everything that was unimportant to feel like part of something great and unexplored. When she reached the top, Juliet stopped and looked around. Below her stretched valleys covered with green forests and clear lakes, and farther away, in the distance, snow-capped mountain peaks stood against the backdrop of the blue sky. In that moment, she felt peace in her heart, deep and vast. All her fears, all the doubts that once surrounded her, now seemed so small and insignificant compared to this grandeur. She sat on a stone, closed her eyes, and slowly began to breathe, allowing herself to feel every change in her body. Inhale, she felt her chest filling with air. Exhale, she let go of everything that had once held her back. Each thought, each image faded away, leaving only a sense of lightness and presence in this moment. Juliet began to realize that her present was not just the result of her decisions. It was the result of how she perceived the world and how she interacted with it. Everything that came before no longer mattered. Now, she was her inner world, her energy, her feelings, her ability to be open and receptive. With each passing day, she felt her relationships with others and with herself changing. She no longer sought external validation of her worth. Her strength now came from within. And though at times she felt tired from endless thoughts and inner searching, she knew that it was all part of the process. Change does not happen instantly, but it is inevitable when a person chooses the path of true self-awareness. One day, as she walked along a forest trail, she met an old woman who, it turned out, had also been traveling through these places. The woman was one of the locals living in a mountain village and invited Juliet to stay the night in her home. Though Juliet preferred solitude, she felt that this invitation was part of her journey. She agreed. That evening, sitting by the fireplace in the old woman's house, Juliet listened to her stories about life in the mountains, about how important it was to be in harmony with nature and oneself. The old woman spoke about how she had learned to let go of everything that caused her pain and how essential it was to acknowledge that anyone, no matter their age or past, could start anew. These words deeply resonated with Juliet. In their simplicity, there was profound meaning. Life does not end at a certain moment. It always continues if we are ready to open ourselves to the new and allow ourselves to change. After that night, Juliet realized that her journey was not just physical but spiritual. She was walking a path not only to find answers, but to learn how to be in the world, to be with herself, to be open to what the future would bring. Juliet increasingly felt her inner world changing. She no longer sought to find her path in isolation. She understood that one could be a part of the world, connecting with people and nature, and in that connection, true transformation happens. Soon, Juliet decided to return to her previous place of residence. But now, her perspective was different. She no longer feared returning because she had already found what she was looking for: inner harmony and self-confidence. Her return was met with silence. The place that once seemed ordinary and even limiting now appeared as something entirely different. She realized that she had changed herself. Her perception of the world, her relationship with herself and others, had become brighter and more open. Her time in the mountains had become not just a journey but an essential stage of inner work, and now she felt ready for a new beginning. Several days after her return, Juliet understood that her old life could no longer be the same. She decided to take steps toward changes that would reflect her new understanding of herself. Her first step was simple but significant. She began to dedicate more time to herself. Everything that had to do with work, obligations, and daily routines no longer seemed like a priority. She returned to her old studio, but now she used the space for creativity and meditation. She began writing her thoughts, recording the feelings that were now becoming clearer in her mind. Juliet knew that she had to remain true to herself, and if once she thought her role in life was simply to be part of the bigger world, now she understood that her life deserved to be full and rich with her own desires. Every evening, she would take long walks through the surrounding forests, enjoying each step. Nature had once again become her friend, not just a backdrop. Here, she had learned to hear her inner voice and listen to it. Everything about her life now depended on her. Juliet understood that her happiness was not the result of searching beyond herself, but that it was something she carried within. This knowledge filled her with peace. She began to communicate openly with people, but no longer from the position of should or can. She allowed herself to be sincere and authentic. At times, she felt awkward when trying to share her new worldview with those close to her. But each time, no matter how difficult it was, she felt the strength within herself to continue moving in this direction. One day, after another walk, Juliet met an old friend whom she hadn't spoken to in many years. His name was Thomas, and he was one of those people she had once considered important in her life. But then their paths had diverged. Now, after all these years, they met again, and it wasn't by chance. Juliet felt that this encounter was another milestone on her journey. Thomas noticed how much Juliet had changed. She was more open, more alive, and there was a fire in her eyes that he hadn't seen many years ago. "You're different," he said, looking at her with surprise. "You're no longer afraid to be yourself?" Juliet smiled and sighed. "I've learned to let go," she replied. "I realize that happiness doesn't come from the outside. It's here, inside. And I'm ready to learn how to live with this happiness." Thomas nodded, as if understanding her words. "It seems like you've really changed. And that's amazing." Juliet felt a sense of relief from his words. She knew that her path had not been easy, but it was her own road, and now she walked it with confidence. Soon after this meeting, Juliet returned home, where a new chapter of her life began. She continued working on herself, developing, and sharing her experiences with those around her. She realized that everyone could be an example for others, even if they didn't realize it. And her new path was just the beginning. She created a new project, a space where people could come and open up to themselves. It wasn't something big or loud, but every person who came there felt that they were being seen, that their path mattered, and that they could be themselves. Several months passed, and Juliet saw how her world was changing. She no longer felt that she was in search of something. She realized that the path doesn't end where we begin, and that true happiness is a process that has no end. A few more months had passed since Juliet opened her small space for self-development. The space was modest, a cozy studio in an old house surrounded by greenery, with large windows through which she could watch the changes in nature. It became her refuge and a place to work with those who sought support. Juliet noticed how many came with similar questions, with the same concerns she had once experienced. And with each new person who entered her space, she felt more and more that her own transformations were becoming part of something larger. Despite her new confidence, she knew she still had a long way to go to fully accept all her experiences and past. She understood that the path of self-awareness doesn't end with one victory over oneself, but also includes moments of doubt and setbacks. But now, she saw these moments not as obstacles, but as another opportunity for growth. One day, in early autumn, when the leaves began to change color, she decided to hold a small gathering outdoors for those who wanted to talk about their searches and struggles. It was her first experience with such an event, and she was a little nervous, but still felt that it was an important step. The weather that day was clear, and the forest around her studio was shrouded in a light mist. Juliet invited her visitors into the garden, where she set up some comfortable chairs and invited people to talk. Among the participants were both old acquaintances and new faces, but they all sought something more than just comfort or quick solutions. They sought connection, and Juliet felt that this was important. The conversations began to flow on their own, and each person told their story. Some expressed fears that they would never be able to change their lives. Others regretted past choices. But they all shared what was their deepest desire: to be heard. This was the very connection they had been looking for, and Juliet noticed how important her space had become for these people. She realized that her path was not just a journey to herself, but also a journey to help others in their own searches. She realized that the most important thing she could offer these people was a space for open self-expression and acceptance. This place was not just physical, but symbolic. It embodied freedom, safety, and a place for growth and change. The evening ended on a high note when one of the participants, an elderly man, stood up and said, "I came here feeling like it was too late to change anything in my life, but now I feel like not everything is lost."